Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Hudson Institute, whether you are in person or joining us online. My name is Tomas Ineliūnas. I'm a visiting fellow here at the Hudson Institute and a professor at Vilnius University in Lithuania. Before we start this discussion, I have a very small announcement about the next intended event. Unfortunately, Moldovan Minister of Foreign Affairs is not yet here, and this discussion is postponed. So have in mind that this is not happening at least today. But still, as the NATO summit begins today, Washington, D.C. is vibrant with official and side events. And today's discussion will focus on the expectations and potential outcomes of the NATO summit, the current security situation in Ukraine, of course, and new challenges Europe is facing, including never seen before increase of diversions and sabotage actions across Europe. It's my pleasure to introduce Lithuania's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Gabrielius Landsbergis. He is the second Lithuanian minister in 2 months, I guess, here at Washington, D.C. to speak here at Hudson Institute. And I'm really excited to welcome just another former student of mine, just a coincidence. So, Mr. Landsbergis, the chairman of Lithuania's major ruling party, is one of Europe's most vocal diplomats. He emphasizes relentlessly the importance of standing firm against Russia's and China's aggressions. In 2022, Mr. Landsbergis has been named among the most influential diplomats in the European Union by Politico, and he has even been called Dragon Slayer for his bold actions in resisting China's pressure over Taiwan. And of course, since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Landsbergis has outspokenly advocated for military support to Ukraine and the need to counter Russia. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Landsbergis and Peter Rao, Senior Fellow at Hudson Institute and Director of the Center on Europe and Eurasia.
Well, I think it speaks volumes about your reputation that despite all the security hassles around the Hudson perimeter, you've managed to attract a full house. So welcome to Hudson, and everyone's eager to hear what you have to say.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's start with the really important questions. What kind of professor is Tomas? Was he a tough grader?
I'd say one of the most interesting ones that I had during the university time. So it's a good to have him here, and it's a good memory of the university.
Well, you're usually much more direct describing the CCP and the Russians. That's a rather ambiguous answer. But let's move to the Washington summit. Since we're here on the eve of the summit, it's hard to say what are your impressions. You have yet to really interact with the leadership at the summit. But what are your expectations heading into the Washington summit some 24 hours before it begins?
Well, since we left Vilnius last year, Vilnius summit, it was clear that we'll have a summit here in Washington, obviously a celebratory one, 75 years of NATO. And it was clear that we have to make it somehow here in Washington, so that the message is not just about the celebration of what we managed to achieve so far. Being on a crossroad because of the war in Europe, because of Russia's war against Ukraine, it's not just a crossroad for Europe, it's not a crossroad for Ukraine, but it's also for the whole transatlantic community. Therefore, while celebrating 75 years, we need to talk about future. And future is defined by what we do in Ukraine. So I found myself usually talking about this, that look, I'm very much eager to raise a glass of champagne and congratulate my colleagues and my country, which is it's been 20 years in NATO, safe and secure under the Article 5 umbrella, but also to remind what's at stake. That is definitely not a given, what we have currently, and that it could be that the biggest battles of NATO are still in the future. And it is possible that in rather near future. And we managed to have 75 years of peace, but that peace is being checked right now. So that was the concept that we approached the summit. And myself and the team that participates in negotiations even right now, here, just a couple of miles from here, that was the concept, to reflect the reality, not just the memory. And Putin is making sure that we do that. Unfortunately, with a very brutal attack against civilian objects again in Ukraine, this time against a cancer ward hospital, children's hospital in Kiev. A total message, very clear message that he feels that he won't get any answer from us, and he can act with impunity, and therefore we have to make sure that he doesn't get away with this.
In May, you told Christian Amanpour of CNN that you worry Ukraine may end up being, quote, a story of Western failure. Do you still think that, or do you think that the trajectory might be improving? That Ukraine might be a story of Western failure? Well, it's very much,
that passage of history has not yet been written. It could be the biggest success. It could be the strengthening of the transatlantic union. It could be strengthening of Europe. It could be securing of everything that we fought for 75 years for the 75 years to come, or it could be the failure. So we are still in this Schrodinger's moment where the cat is both dead and alive. So the history in this is both very bad and very good. It's still not written.
And you say the communique or the negotiations for the summit deliverables are still ongoing at this very moment, despite the late hour. Even though it is still in flux, can you give us a little bit of a taste of what we should expect as a public coming out of the next 24, 48 hours?
Well, I think that the mood is a bit different than it was a year ago. A year ago, one might had sense that we are writing a new passage, at least for NATO, right, and maybe for Ukraine. Now the expectations are rather, low, meaning that the allies really want to stick to a consensus, avoid any, political battle when it comes to negotiations, and bring what you could call like a clean text that has a bar lowered, but where everybody finds an agreement and can, to some level of comfort, say, look, we find what we need in that text. So I don't have a sense of any breakthrough in this, and that means that the breakthroughs, as with the victories, are still in the future.
So unity, but lowest common denominator unity, essentially.
This is where we are currently, because I don't believe that any of allied member states, allied states could, has a sense of ability to push the line further. Nobody has a sense that that this is a crucial moment to do that. So basically, it's better to stay where we've been during Vilnius. Maybe try to amend the text here and there, offering a narrative for the summit rather than a political step.
In recent days, there were reports that a Dutch Patriot battery, or system, I should say, is being deployed to Lithuania as part of Baltic Connector 24. What is the state of Lithuanian security right now? Are you feeling confident in deterrence? Are you nervous? How does Lithuania view its own security situation?
It's there's several factors in this. So I would divide this into three layers. So first one is, it sounds banal, but it's true from our perspective, is that Lithuania's security is being fought for in the trenches in Kharkiv. This is where, the outcome of that battle will define our security. How if Ukraine manages to win that battle, to push Russia out of the area of territory of Ukraine, we're that much more secure and safe. That is clear. If Russians are able to progress, rebuild, act with impunity, and basically challenge the remaining order of European security, then we're in trouble. The second thing is, the second layer could be the whole transatlantic ability to deter. At this stage, we still have full trust that we are in alliance that deters, first and foremost, because it's able to send a strong enough signal that the answer, you don't want that answer, that the adversary just doesn't want that answer, that we're able to have it with our defense plans, with our defense capabilities, equipment, industry, and whatnot, that you would not want to test us. So this is still there. Why I'm saying still, because that's also being tested, and definitely, Putin fighting Ukraine, he also tests us, our ability, to continue fighting, to continue with our ability to build consensus, to continue to build, to manage democratic processes, which are, messy and not so easy. So this again, we have to keep this in our minds and not lose attention to this detail. And third is what we're doing nationally. So just to give you a hint, so this year we have a national election, later this year in October, and we've just approved what is called a National Defense Foundation fund. Basically, we raised certain taxes in order to get to 3.03% of GDP spending towards our defense. We're procuring additional items, additional pieces of air defense that will be produced, some of them here in the United States, some elsewhere. So imagine the difficulty of the debate. Definitely nobody wants to raise taxes during the election year. But unfortunately, we don't have a privilege of time.
Just blame it on the other parties.
Yes, well, we blame it on Putin. It's not just practically easy, but it's evident that he's not going to wait until we are the most prepared, until we are in the best possibility to defend. Actually, he will do exactly the opposite. If he has a plan to attack, if he has a plan to test Article 5, he will do that when we're at our weakest. And the longer we wait, the bigger window of opportunity we present to him.
In May, I think it was, at the informal ministerial in Prague, at the doorstep, you made reference to this French proposal that's been floated at least to put European troops or French troops into Ukraine. And I think you said rather memorably, I meant it when I said we believe in Ukrainian victory and Lithuania would be prepared to attach itself or support such a proposal. Is there any update on the French proposal, or do you have any predictions of where that style of thinking at least might go?
Well, I think it's the style of thinking is a very needed one, right? Because President Macron, what he suggested is a change in thinking. That we do not allow ourselves to talk about really bad scenarios. Somehow we avoid talking about this, but they're out there. It is a chance that if we don't step up, if we get tired, if so many things that are happening will continue on happening, Russians just might continue. And then we have to have answers ready of what is next, and this is what President Macron raised. I mean, we will not allow Ukraine to lose. And there are not so many countries that actually said this. And therefore, I personally find it quite easy to join in this, right? Because if Ukraine loses, my country is next. That's clear. And therefore, I'm not just talking about Ukraine. I'm talking about myself, my kids. 2 of them are in the military. They will have, in the reserve. They would have to go to fight for my country. So it's really personal. And it's not just for me, it's for the big part of the country. So we need to formulate a winning strategy. Now, what happens, practically? So, when it comes to us, our statement was that we politically are ready to consider these steps that President Macron suggested. There's a spectrum of what can happen. The debate was about whether Russians should find NATO troops or French troops in the front. So that wasn't part of the debate. It was more about the instructors. It was more about assisting with border police and demining missions and stuff like that. More of what you could call a non-combatant status of assistance that has been previously happening in Ukraine before the war. Lithuanian instructors were in Ukraine. So many others were also in Ukraine.
California National Guard,
yeah.
So famously.
It would be the reestablishment of what was previously happening. I use the example of a couple of things. So at the beginning of the war, almost all of the diplomatic diplomats left Kiev, apart from Vatican and Poland and Japan, if I'm not mistaken. Then we started returning. Mm-hmm. So basically, we returned to what was previously happening. At the beginning, there were no visits because it was not safe for presidents and ministers to go to Kiev. Then we returned. So the thinking is that instructors could also return. And it's possible to provide enough security and enough safety with air defense units, with maybe shifting the places of where the instructions are happening, and so on and so forth. I mean, it's possible to plan this and return. It sends a very strong signal. It tells Russians that we're no longer afraid. We don't think that you're setting the rules. You shouldn't be setting rules in what we can do in Ukraine, if Ukraine is our partner. And if they want this, and if we have the means, it's up to us to decide. It's not you who set the rules. So that's the thinking, and we would like to be part of it. And last point in this is obviously democracy steps in, and election time in France, which was quite a nail-biting event. I'd call it that. So it's rather not clear, as to what the policy of new government, of a new coalition, most likely would be. How it would work in tandem with the president, where he has a lot of power when it comes to making decisions in defense and foreign policy. So it remains to be seen. But that doesn't change our position. We are still ready. If the coalition forms, if we have leadership by bigger countries, we're ready to go along.
Let's go back to Prague, to the ministerial. I happened to be in Prague during that time, and I spoke to at least 2 foreign ministers on background who described the informal ministerial as focusing heavily on hybrid warfare tactics, which is something that you're closely associated with, not practicing them, but calling out Russian use of hybrid warfare in Europe. And I'd like to say that while the Russians have their conventional force committed in Ukraine, they're using the nuclear level to saber rather and try to deter the West, but also the hybrid unconventional gray zone area to try and muscle out the West to go after it. And as I was told in that ministerial, there was a lot of talk about at what point you've crossed in Article 5, when there are arson attacks, when there are buoys removed from rivers denotating the maritime border, when there is critical infrastructure connecting the Baltics to the Nordic states severed, for example. What's your take on the status of hybrid warfare, and what do you think is going on, and where is it heading?
Well, first of all, we still call it hybrid, for the maybe lack of finding better words. But I think that there is a line where I would personally be unable to call it still something hybrid, when it's clearly a very clear attack. I've even publicly I've raised this question because there's public information that certain events, arson events, where they happened in my country and in some other neighboring countries, they happened with assistance of Russian special institutions, let's call it that. And so what is that? Is it something hybrid? For me, it's a very clear kinetic attack, which ended up not harming people by a coincidence. But it wasn't planned that it shouldn't harm. So for me, this is a terrorist attack. And the only time that Article 5 was used, it was because of terrorist attack in NATO's history. So I don't think that there's a question whether it can happen again or it should happen again. I mean, not the hybrid or terrorist attack, but the answer, the response. Obviously, it should, because it happened. The question is, where do you draw the line? You know, if one person dies in the arson.
Is that where your colleagues are, you think? Fatalities is the red line?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. But I mean, it's what we are doing, and I'm personally doing, and I did that in Prague as well. You know, I'm raising these questions because this is the question that Lithuanian public would like to know the answer to, right? So, you know, if it's one person, if it's five, if it's 500, you know, where do you say, okay, you know, Russia is behind the terrorist attack in NATO countries, so what do we do about it? And there is a bit of sense of reluctance to call a spade, because you certainly have to have an answer. So what do you do about it? You know, so what would be your answer? And I see a couple of problems with not having a very clear position on this. First of all, Russia is reading into this as a weakness, because I don't think that they're basically what they're doing, they're probing. You know, if we burn down at a shopping mall in somewhere in eastern flank, what happens? Okay, there's a criminal investigation, but not much else. There's no multilateral answer. There's no NATO answer. There's no European answer. You're not doing anything. Okay, fine. That means that we can go, burn the second one. Maybe we can burn a third one. And for them now, with the modern technology, with social networks, with Telegram and whatever, what they're using, it's rather easy to achieve the results that would be shocking for our public and that would, influence a political debate. And I think that this is, rather grave risk of inviting these events further, and maybe even in greater scope. And for us as well, I mean, we are, without any answer, we are telling our people that, look, we cannot name, we cannot have an answer. And that, in turn, the second bad thing is that we might see what I would call a fracturing in decision-making process. Because a group of countries would be forced to formulate their own strategy towards these sort of events. What we see in 2021, when Lithuania first time faced what was called successfully, you managed to convince the public and international community that it was a hybrid event, illegal migration crisis. Well, Belarus instigated waves of migrants to try and cross the border. At the beginning, it was very difficult, to formulate a European answer. No, I'm not even talking about NATO, because NATO was never involved in this, but even European answer. So what happens then? You cannot just say, okay, so NATO is not doing anything, so we're not doing anything. You have to do something, right? Because your public demands, right? We're seeing, that there are tens of thousands of people on the other side of the border. In each and every hour, a couple of hundred are being pushed through to our border. So what are you going to do? So you have to formulate your own policy. What happened later? So we formulated, then we implemented it together with Poland and Latvia, because these were the first three countries who were facing the threat. And then, slowly it became some sort of a regional and European, that you could start calling policy. Exactly the same things would happen with current Russia's approach. You would see a country formulating its own strategy outside NATO, which is not healthy. Therefore, I would imagine that it's way better, to talk this out, formulate a strategy, announce things that you can announce, so that Russians know that there will be an answer, and we're really, having our hands full with preparation to this, and having a united answer. That is what a healthy alliance would do. So,
throw some elbows inside the family to try to encourage a little more forward-leaning posture, but publicly take a unified position.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the Landsbergis doctrine, so to speak. On this. Okay. Well, Lithuania strikes me as being particularly vulnerable to hybrid techniques, given the large numbers of refugees you've taken on board. Do you think that your country has a handle on who all is in your country? This is a topic that comes up a lot in the United States on account of the migration wave.
Meaning
from our southern border.
those who crossed in?
Well, I'm sure that some of the Russians and others that have fled to Lithuania came for true fear of the war and fleeing, but I can imagine that those security institutions, as you call them, saw this as an opportunity also to potentially bring in their own people into Vilnius and the rest of Lithuania.
I see two dimensions to this question. So first of all, when it comes to resilience to hybrid events, countries like mine, in many cases, are better prepared than some of our even bigger allies. The reason is that we've been under hybrid threat for decades. Not just under threat, but basically under hybrid events, or you might call them that. Our first influence into our electoral processes, was noticed in 2000s, when nobody was even talking about this. We were just 10 years into our independence, and then we suddenly see political parties being financed from somewhere strange sources. So we started building up our resilience decades before it became what you would call cool in other countries. So now, if you want to look what worked, when it comes to resilience towards electoral interference, energy independence, and so many other things, you would look into the Baltic countries, Lithuania, or the region itself, and you would find good examples as what works, what doesn't work. The second point is that you're right. Obviously, Lithuania has been chosen, and many countries in the region, as a country to stay and hide, either from war or from oppression in Belarus, in Russia, and so on and so forth. Not just for economic reasons, but because we're politically free, and you can stay and live comfortable life in our countries. When it comes to hybrid activities of Russia, the way that they are recruiting people, they do target these group of people who tend to live in Lithuania and other countries in the region. But that's not always, and not necessarily just the people who are targeted. It could be basically anybody. It could be a person out of luck. It could be a person just looking for a quick euro, or that is paid by cryptocurrency. If you do some work that has been asked by somebody through the Telegram channel. It could be a refugee from Belarus. It could be a refugee from Ukraine. It could be and it could be also, as I mentioned, Lithuanian. So certain people could be vulnerable more than others, but that does not immediately mean that it's just these groups who are vulnerable. But in any case, the biggest problem here is that trying to secure the ways how this influence seeps in is a game of whack-a-mole. Basically, closing one loop, one loophole, there's another one opening. Therefore, you have to start by sending a signal to the source. If you do this, the answer will be such. Because if we're just, closing down the leaks, that's all that we're going to do.
Yeah, dynamic deterrence, and then kind of free and open societies can't just play defense on these issues.
Exactly.
To establish an equilibrium. Last time I was in Lithuania, I was told that the border between Kaliningrad and Lithuania was relatively stable, in part because the Russians don't want to jeopardize their rail links from outside of Lithuania through Lithuania into Kaliningrad. Is that still true? And secondly, if I could add to that question, what is the general military balance in Kaliningrad? Are they still heavily invested in Ukraine? Much of their units were emptied out in equipment, or are they beginning to reconstitute some of their forces in Kaliningrad?
So first of all, the border is rather stable. I don't think that they have an interest, as you say, in it being stable. They're getting most of the goods that they need and require through the rail link. People can travel. Russians can travel with a easier visa regime. Let's call it that, through Lithuanian territory to Kaliningrad. So I think that they prefer the status quo currently. We have more problems on Belarusian border. which is for us rather a difficult one. When it comes to Finland, well, they have a lot of issues with the Russian border. They managed it just basically by closing it down completely, and in that way they managed the situation. The situation currently. Your second question was?
Just the state of military balance, whether or not
Right.
Kaliningrad's still emptied out.
So the as much information as I can provide. Obviously, almost everything that they have, starting from Kaliningrad all the way to the Far East, has been or is on the process of being sent to Ukraine. But that shouldn't give us, a false hope that, oh look, everything is empty, Russia is vulnerable or whatever, and we can take it for granted. So that's definitely not a fact. The factories are running, they are rebuilding, they're hiring new people, they are refurbishing the bases, the military bases that they have, and so we cannot give in to this false hope that somehow Russia has been crippled by this war. They are in a difficult situation, obviously, fighting in Ukraine, a war that they have not expected at the beginning. But when you put a country like Russia on its, the whole economy on the war footing, it's, one has to take this seriously.
And of course, it's backstopped by its partners,
Exactly.
China in the Far East, Iran in the Middle
Exactly.
East, and in
It's not
Northeast
alone.
Asia,
Yeah.
DPRK, which raises the question of how Europe is handling Iran, North Korea, and China. Maybe let's just begin with Iran. I don't detect it being a significant part of the agenda in all the conversations I've had in the lead up to the next 48 hours. Is there been a paradigm shift, or has there been a paradigm shift in Europe on Iran as there has been on Russia? Are Europeans sufficiently alive to the problems that Iran is posing, that its drones and ballistic missiles are attacking the eastern flank of NATO, essentially in Ukraine? Do we need a shift on Iran still, or where does that stand?
I wouldn't probably call it a paradigm shift, but there was movement. That's a fact. We have Iranian companies that are sanctioned. We have additionally, meaning during just the war, we have components that are being used, European Western components that are used in drone production, that are being banned from being shipped to Iran, which is already a change. So I would say that the debate has started, which is a cautious one. From my perspective, if you would be talking about a paradigm shift, then you basically you call it an alliance, because it is what it is. It is an alliance. They're helping each other, avoid sanctions, technology transfers, military transfers, whatnot, and then you treat it like one, right? Like an adversary, the whole bunch. So we're not there yet. There we see differences, of approach, especially when it comes to China. That's definitely a very different case for Europeans, a very difficult case to approach. And again, the timidity allows opportunity for an adversary.
Let me ask one or two more questions, and then if we have microphones, we'll allow these brave people who have worked their way past Capitol security to ask the minister a question or two.
Sure.
And let's just go to China next then, the next supporter of Russia, and of course in a different order of magnitude altogether than Iran. They have not supplied direct weaponry in the same way that Iran has, but as Secretary Blinken and others never hesitate to point out, from microelectronics to machine tools, they've been essential to the Russian reconstitution and even just maintaining the Russian war effort altogether. The Europeans and the Americans have said a red line is just what the Iranians are doing, actual weaponry to Russia. And they haven't touched the dual-use items, but I detect a slight shift there. Are we nearing the point where Europe and the United States will go to China and say, if you continue providing dual-use components that are so important to Russia for this war effort, it will jeopardize fundamentally your relationship with us? Or is it, which is kind of where I think it still sits, one issue amongst many in the files that we have with China. So we go to Beijing, or Beijing comes to us and we say, this is a problem, you shouldn't do this. Next, let's talk about automobile trade, or next, let's talk about tariffs, or whatever it might be.
Well, I think that it's strategically we still have not yet decided of where we would like our relationship with China go further. From my perspective, again, I see that we are entangled in the very similar relationship that we had with Russia. Just instead of natural resources, there are other spheres that we are entangled in. That means that it doesn't allow us to take a very clear position. Where do we want this to lead? So definitely, currently, this is a question among others. We raise this issue, we raise Ukraine, and then we talk about, as you mentioned,
climate change.
Yeah. So from my perspective, it allows China, a lot of room to maneuver, because there is no clear sense as what will happen if we do this further. So I think that they are still rather comfortable in this, and I think it's wrong. It assists Russia, obviously in its war, but mostly it assists China, for them to grow their strength in military, to find a way how to avoid sanctions, to find a way how to avoid this European or Western annoyance, let's say, about them, and still be able to be a real kingmaker in this conflict, and possibly in any other that they would entertain being part of.
What are we going to say about or read about China and communique or declaration, whatever it is, coming out of the NATO summit?
It's still being under negotiation, but I think that we will find a rather strong text, which is a new thing, a change from last year.
Oh, an improvement over
an improvement. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, I'd love to go to the audience for a question or two, if you have it. We can go to the gentleman in the back, and if you could just wait 1 minute, we'll pass you a microphone. Please introduce yourself as well. Thank you.
I'm Alexei Gorbachev. I'm with the Voice of America. I have a question. In the beginning, you said that major NATO battles are in the future. Could you elaborate on that in terms of what is the probability of direct conflict between NATO and Russia in the next 5 years? What is your projection?
Was that for me or for the minister?
For both of you. Yes.
If you'd like to take that, sure.
Thank you. Well, I've covered a little bit about this in my initial, answering first a couple of initial questions. Basically, when we say that the future of Europe is decided in Ukraine, what do we mean by this? If Ukraine is unable to win and Russia has not lost, that will provide Russia a lot of possibility to regrow what they're even doing right now, learn lessons, which they are doing currently, and use the lessons and use the new military resources that they have and they will have build up during the couple of years in the future, to use it against NATO. And this is where the most crucial point stands. Do we offer a deterrent enough that Russians would know that this should not be tried? If we don't, by political inaction, by military inaction, by inability to build up the, one thing is to have the military plans. The second thing is to fill those plans up with a military force. If we do not send the signal in these directions, this is where the most dangerous time can come from. Where even a thought, even a word, a sentence, that NATO is not sure whether we would be able to defend every single member equally, would sound as an invitation to Putin. And I think that honestly, it has been said by many Western leaders and thinkers and whatnot, that the next 3 to 5 years might be rather dangerous years for NATO, because we are picking up, and they are building it right now. When we're talking numbers in Europe, for us to so we had a lengthy conversation with our German partners. Now they made a decision, that historic decision, to send a brigade to Lithuania that will be permanently stationed in Lithuania. That's 5,000 troops. And it's not an easy discussion. Politically for them, it's a difficult one. Politically for us, it's also a rather expensive thing, right? We'll be spending a lot of money just to be able to accept 5,000 troops. Now, when we're talking about Ukrainian army, we're talking what? 400, 500,000 troops? When we're talking Russian army, it's 1.2 troops, 1.2 million troops. So this, we have to be sure that when we're talking about NATO's ability, we're measuring up.
Tomas's other student had nice things to say about the German brigade coming to Lithuania. On that point, though, any major war in the Baltics would one way or another include Belarus, the way it has been involved also in the Ukraine context. Who is Alexander Lukashenko? Is he someone chafing under Putin's thumb? Is he somebody who's a wholly owned subsidiary? Is he looking for independence? How are we to think about Belarus?
For us, it is it's a rather dangerous neighbor to have, because as you rightfully mentioned, at this stage it's completely hypothetical. It has to be clear. Any attack on NATO in the region, in our region, would happen through Belarus. There's no other way around. Right. Just plain geography. So we have to keep this. We have to keep this in mind. Lukashenko himself, he wanted to maintain his own private, security, prosperity, whatever that is, and lost his country in turn. So he's there, but his country is barely there. The biggest hope for Belarus comes from Belarusian people. And throughout my term in these 4 years, I've tried really to push this point through. 600,000 people coming out in the streets of Minsk. That's a lot. We haven't seen that in Russia. We haven't seen that anywhere in the countries like Russia. So that tells you something about the spirit of the people, and it's different. They long for freedom. They long for dignity. They long for, I would say democracy, because, they came out because of the, stolen election. And I have the belief that this spirit is there.
Hasn't been extinguished altogether.
No, it hasn't been. And therefore we have to support this. We have to be there for them when they will, one day they will call for us. And we have to be ready.
How can I ask for another question after that ending? Right? It's a lovely ending. I'll ask a final question. What are you gonna tell Secretary Blinken when you see him? What does a Lithuanian ask of the United States, or what message do you want to convey? Just between us.
Yeah, it's good. It's off the record.
Camera's in the wall and the ceiling. You can barely see it. Yeah.
Now, honestly, the importance, and it's not trying to convince the current administration. I think that they've been excellent in this, but in general, to as a conduit to the people of the United States, is that to once again reiterate the importance of United States in Europe. This bond, this connection that helped us build Europe, that helped us rebuild our country. And when you visited Vilnius, it's a lovely city, it's a lovely country. And it's lovely today because it has NATO. We have EU. We're part of it. We're safe, we're secure, and we're prosperous because of this umbrella. And we'll do our part in this. I mentioned 3%. We're giving all we can to Ukraine for their war effort, and we'll continue to do that. So the main message is that we need you. We will not be free riders. We will try to do what we can, and we'll try to convince others to do the same.
Will there be a new defense pledge at the Washington summit at perhaps 2.5% or higher?
I'm not too optimistic.
Okay. Well, I think we know now, after that 45 minutes, why Politico, as Thomas mentioned, coronated you one of the great foreign ministers of Europe. It's really been a fascinating conversation. Thanks for your openness. Thanks for coming back again to Hudson Institute. That's twice we've managed to have you this year. It's a real pleasure. And good luck with the negotiations and the summit meeting in the next 48 hours. For those of you watching at home, please stay at hudson.org for more programming. Unfortunately, as just mentioned, the Moldovan foreign minister isn't going to be able to make it today, but we'll have more for you at hudson.org soon. Thanks so much for joining us. And thanks to all of you for coming here in person today.
Thank you.